Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSite Live Lectures. Dear friends, as you know that we've started a series on religion, culture and society in Indian history. Today we are conducting yet another lecture in the same series. In today's lecture we will be talking about Puranic Hinduism. In that we will discuss its evolution and development. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Dr. Neeraj Sahai. Dr. Sahai is Associate Professor in Department of History in Sri Venkateshwara College, University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, students. As has already been discussed, referred to, today we are going to discuss an important topic, which is Puranic Hinduism, and we basically look at the evolution and development of Puranic Hinduism. So it would imply that there is a certain historical process through which Puranic Hinduism evolves and develops. In terms of time frame, it evolves around, early Christian centuries, beginning with, it can be traced back to Vedic period, or some even, push it back to pre-Vedic period. But it is not before Gupta period that it is fully elaborated in its complexity, and it is in the aftermath of Gupta period that it continues to grow and develop. Now, this topic, Puranic Hinduism, Evolution and Development, is part of the UGC CEC lecture series on religion, society and culture in Indian history. And let us look at the objectives of this topic that we have for today. So we start with the definition. As far as definition is concerned, definition revolves around the usage of this term called Puranic Hinduism. Puranic Hinduism is interchangeably also called as Hinduism, and we look at this Puranic Hinduism in its evolution from the formative phase. The formative phase here is basically the post-Mauryan centuries to its fuller elaboration in the Gupta centuries. And as we have already referred to, it continues to grow and develop even in the post-Gupta centuries. Now, the image of Puranic Hinduism evokes curiosity. In popular perception, Puranic Hinduism is also supposed to be dated from since time immemorial. However, at least it can be traced back to Vedic period historically. However, the term Hinduism is of modern period, modern usage, and we find that there are certain important aspects that cannot be ignored. For example, Hinduism is not an organized religion like its counterparts, the other counterparts that we have. Also, it doesn't have an organized text. There are no dogmas. There are no certain founders, individual founders. Also, it is basically a combination of diverse faiths and practices, which also has an unmistakable presence of caste system. So, as far as Puranic Hinduism is concerned, its definition is very, very important. Last but not the least about the definition part is the eulogistic imprint of Brahmanism, which is very much there. Now, coming to the issue of the relationship between Vedic Brahmanism and Puranic Hinduism. So, what is the trajectory exactly? How do we try to understand the transition from Vedic Brahmanism to Puranic Hinduism? Does Hinduism or Puranic Hinduism in its entirety come from Vedic period onwards, or there are certain stages. Actually, there are processes which are very, very important, processes of historical evolution that cannot be ignored. When we look at Vedic Brahmanism, it is the triad of Indra, Varun and Agni which is very, very important. As far as the Gupta period is concerned, or as far as the post-Mauryan to Gupta period is concerned, Puranic Hinduism basically deals with the triad of Brahma, Vishnu and Mahesh. Here Brahma is the creator and Vishnu is supposed to be the preserver and Mahesa is supposed to be the destroyer. Also, in terms of elements, we look at it from Rajas to Sattva to Tamas respectively. So, to begin with, one can look at the replacement of the triad from Varun, Indra and Agni to Brahma, Vishnu and Mahesh. So, that is one distinction. Also, Puranic Hinduism, at least in some respect, some elements can be traced back to Vedic period, if not to the pre-Vedic period. However, one has to also take into cognizance there are important differences between Puranic Hinduism and Vedic Brahmanism. For example, there is ritual supremacy in the Vedic Brahmanism as compared to devotion, which is a very important integral aspect of Puranic Hinduism. Secondly, in the Puranic Hinduism, we witness a newer form of worship which is actually traced back from epic period onwards, and we find a fuller elaboration in the Puranic period. It stands in contrast to the practice of sacrifice, which was the hallmark of the Vedic religion. So, as far as Vedic Brahmanism is concerned and Puranic Hinduism is concerned, there is a definite transition that we find. Also, there are various stages that help in discerning the evolution and development of Puranic Hinduism. For example, it may start from Vedic Upanishadic period, then develops through epics, and in Puranas we find that there is a definite shape of this Puranic Hinduism. Then the question of Brahmins or the role that they played is also very important. Here we may refer to the Brahmin priesthood, the kind of role that they were playing. And we find that the role of the Brahmin was to connect Puranic Hinduism to the Vedic period. So it must have been some kind of strategy or some kind of a skill to actually trace the linkages. Some scholars have also suggested that the progressive Brahmins did spread the Brahmanical ethos among aboriginals and the non-Vedic cults. These aboriginals and non-Vedic cults did fall outside the Vedic cultural milieu. So, all these activities led to the resurgence of Brahmins. They were brought into limelight, and Brahmins did disseminate Varna mechanism and also certain caste rules pertaining to food and marriage. Then the role of Brahmins is also important in the way they help to transform the epics into treatises. We find that the epics are also not uniform, uniform literature. You find variation. You find that there are chronological layers within these epics, and these epics pass through stages of interpolation and inflation. So, the role of Brahmins again was very, very important here. Also, the whole process that brought Brahmins into historical limelight was the ascendancy of Sanskrit and emergence of a new form of worship which was based on the Smriti texts. The historical process of assimilation of various cults was a very important development, with the help of which Vedic Brahminism could evolve into Puranic Hinduism, or at least one can look at the evolution and development of Puranic Hinduism. Now, one finds that various non-Aryan cults were assimilated. Some of these could be pre-Aryan cults. Then there were certain animals, and these animals were in various roles associated with certain deities or certain cults. Then we also have the heterodox sects like Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivikas, etc. Besides all this, we have range of deities, and these deities can be called as popular deities. For example, you have Yakshas, you have Nagas, you have Yakshis, Nagis, Kuberas, etc. However, in this process of assimilation, the process was neither smooth nor uncontested. For example, Buddha is supposed to have been inducted as an avatara of Vishnu, but this does not mean that the treatment of Buddha was similar to the treatment of other Puranic Hindu deities or the Brahmanical deities that we have. Also, one has to look at the characterization of Devi or the female deities, how the kind of activities that they are portrayed in, and how they stand vis-a-vis the male Brahmanical deities. This brings us to the question of sources and limitation. Of course, we have a very wide canvas, and the sources are very, very important. However, the sources, we have complex variety of sources. For example, we have Vedas dealing with Vedas and in the whole Vedic corpus of literature, which deal with mythology, cosmology, ritualism, etc. Then epics. For epics, one can suggest that the biggest problem here is the twin problem of interpolation and inflation. And interpolation and inflation had significant bearing on chronology, because they appear they appear in the formative period, and they were finally written by the beginning of Gupta century. As far as Puranas are concerned, Puranas have a definite focus on geography. There is no doubt about it that the geographical focus is very much there. But they deal with origin myths, they deal with dynastic feuds, and they also deal with stories of Vishnu and Shiva. So here again, the chronology is very, very important. How does one look at chronology? As far as the chronological span is concerned and the archaeological support is concerned, we find that there is little corroborative evidence before modern period. From modern period onwards, we have archaeological data, but it is not before the formative phase, which is post-modern centuries, that one can actually find a sculptural representation in detail. Also, there is a definite problem of dating the process of assimilation. How does one date the process of assimilation of various cults? It is not before the formative phase that one may find evidences in terms of coins, then iconic representations on these coins, and the shrine of worship that actually begin to develop from postmodern centuries. It is pertinent to point out here that postmodern centuries are also important, for they bring into light certain developments. For example, temple building, development of sculpture, and between Harappan civilization, but between let us say between Chalcolithic culture and the coming of modern period, there is a big hiatus for which we do not have definite evidences. Now, coming to the question of non-Aryan cults, these non-Aryan cults, before the coming of Aryans, the scholars have actually talked about certain cults. For example, Muni Yati cult. This Muni Yati cult was different from the Vedic Rishi cult, and this Muni Yati cult could be pre-Vedic, and in this cult we find this definite emphasis on yoga, tapas, and sannyas. The sannyas here would basically mean renunciation. Now, taking into cognizance all these factors, one may associate Shiva, and also the background of renunciation, which could be seen in the Magdhan complex. The concept of bhakti, according to some scholars, could also be dated to the pre-Vedic period. However, it is suggested that there were some indigenous tribes which were probably practicing bhakti, and it is only in the post-Vedic period that these cults, these pre-Vedic cults actually resurface, and it was only Bhagavatas who accepted the authority of these cults, while it was rejected by heterodox sects like Buddhism and Jainism. So, as far as Puranic Hinduism is concerned, what do we really mean by Puranic Hinduism? Puranic Hinduism has emphasis on polytheism, which would basically mean worship of diverse faith. Also, this polytheism is in no way in contradiction to monotheistic worship which was there, that people would worship a particular deity. Nevertheless, the presence of various deities and neutrality to other deities could be very much part of this kind of religious complex. Also, there were certain caste practices which was very important, and then we find that we have blend of non-Aryan aboriginals, Dravidians, even heterodox sects, some of their ideas did find their way into Puranic Hinduism. Also absorption of foreign tribes. There were a number of foreign tribes who came into the Indian subcontinent in the post-modern centuries. Namely, we have Scythians called Shakas, Pahlavas, Parthians, or we have Kushanas, etc. Now, the role of the Brahmins, which we have already referred to, was very, very important, and it may be added here to what we have already referred to, that Brahmins had resistance from the ruling Kshatriya elite. So, to skirt this kind of competition, what they did, they basically tried to establish their spiritual supremacy by writing and rewriting many of these texts. As far as the period of evolution is concerned, we find that it was from the period of Upanishads to the emergence of Guptas, to the ascendancy of Guptas, which would be around say 4th century AD. Also, there are certain historical changes which accompany these developments. For example, in society, we have the coming of newer tribes and also proliferation of jatis, which is discussed in detail in Manusmriti. We have the long list of mixed castes there. Also, as far as economy is concerned, we have new crafts being practiced, and you have new crafts and professions basically coming into play. Also, there were some concessions which were being granted to Shudras. They were allowed to worship Lord Krishna, and this was a new development. Now, the period of epics is called the formative phase. Here we have to make a comparison of Ramayana and Mahabharata. As far as Ramayana is concerned, Ramayana in its early form was basically based on heroism, the tribal heroism, where there is personification. There is Lord Rama in the human form. And it is in the book 1 to 7 that we find that this human character actually evolves into incarnation of Vishnu. So there is evolution of Vaishnavism there. Also, there were foreign tribes which were accommodated within the fold of within the Indian subcontinent, and these foreign tribes like Yavanas or Shakas or Parthians, etc., have been referred to in the epic. So it could not have been before 2nd century AD as far as the final form is concerned. Now, if we look at both these epics in terms of meter, in terms of style, and in terms of cultural milieu, they appear to be quite similar. However, what was important was the difference of locality. For example, Ramayana developed in the east, whereas Mahabharata was in the western part as compared to the eastern part. It's in the western part. Now, if we look into the society outside the Gangetic area, the structure of society was simpler. Structure of society was very, very simpler. As far as Mahabharata is concerned, Mahabharata also refers to Yavanas or Pallavas or the other tribes. Here, what is important is the interpolation that one may like to discuss. There is an inflation of 24,000 verses into 100,000 verses, and from a text which was called as Bharat, Mahabharata evolves into Mahabharata. So here the credit is given to the Brahmins and Bhrigu Brahmins, who were supposed to be dealing with codification of law, and they seem to have played a very important role here. Also, we find that there is a change in the meter also from Anustub to Tristub. All these things actually helped in evolving epics into treatises. Now coming to the question of Puranas and Mahapuranas. Puranas are basically 18 in number, and we have the supplementary 18 Upapuranas also. The list and the authority may not be uniformly established. Also, Puranas are dated to the Gupta period, but the critical addition, which deals with the nucleus, is basically dated to the period of 200 BC to 2nd century AD. Also, Puranas deal with devotion to Vishnu and Shiva, but also the association with the mother goddess, the female deity, that is Shakti. Also, Puranas deal with crystallization of the cult of Devi, which is called Devi Mahatmya in Markandeya Purana. Now, as far as some of the early Puranas were concerned, like Brahmand, Vayu, and Vishnu Purana were concerned, they deal with Gupta genealogy, so they could not have been earlier than 4th century AD. There are certain theories that deal with the question of Puranic Hinduism and the important cults in the Puranic Hinduism, how they have been looked at in terms of evolution, whether we can connect them to the pre-Vedic or the Vedic cults. So, as far as these cults are concerned, that is, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and Shaktaism, we take Shaivism first, and here we have A.B. Keith, who actually talks about the importance of Rudra Siva. This Rudra Siva actually grew out of the non-Aryan and the Aryan element, and where we find that there is blending of several deities. Then L. Renaud actually talks about the link between Vedic and the post-Vedic. However, does not believe that there could have been connection between the pre-Vedic and the Vedic cults. J. Gonda, both in terms of Shaivism and Vaishnavism, suggests that it could have been the subjectivity of priests not to refer to the Vedic deities, whether it be it Rudra or be it the Vedic Vishnu. Dandekar also talks about stages and says that there was a definite relationship between proto-historical and historical Hinduism. D.C. Sarkar talks about the importance given to Bhagavata and Pancharatra cult during early Christian centuries, and how Vishnu came to be identified with Vasudeva Krishna. Monier Williams talks about the development from position of ordinary person to position of preeminence, and Keith also makes a distinction between Vedic Vishnu and the eminent Vishnu. So we look at these, there are these theories, and it's important to understand that these things developed in a proper manner. When we return for the next lecture, we'll be discussing in more detail about Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and Shaktaism. Thank you. Welcome back. So we were discussing about Puranic Hinduism, evolution and development, and in the previous lecture we basically tried to look at the evolution, and in the second part of this lecture we will be looking at the development and how there is consolidation of a newer form of worship, which is basically dated to the formative phase, which that is the early Christian centuries, and also, or we can say post-modern centuries, and the following Gupta period, and in the aftermath of Gupta period also the situation continues to grow. And this is part of the lecture series on religion, society and culture in Indian history. So there are certain aspects that we need to deal with before we talk about Shaivism, Vaishnavism and Shaktaism. There are certain representations and structure of worship which are only found in the postmodern centuries and in the later period, and actually there is a hiatus from the Chalcolithic period to the coming of modern period. Here we can talk about various representations pertaining to sculpture, pertaining to certain icons, and also development of certain structures of worship. We are basically referring to the temples here. Let me also suggest at the very outset that owing to the time constraint and the white canvas, we are only dealing with Shaivism, Vaishnavism and Shaktaism, and we are not going into the development of the newer form of worship which is seen from Gupta period onwards, because that would take into cognizance many other factors. So as far as these representations are concerned, we have the earliest evidence of these structures comes from Vishnu temple, which is referred to in the base Nagar pillar inscription of Heliodorus, which is again this is the postmodern centuries. Also we find there was Vishnu and Shiva temples which developed in the Nagarjuna Konda area. So these are the earliest evidences of Vishnu and Shiva. As far as North India was concerned, Mathura was a very, very important center, and in Mathura, we find a growing culture of urbanization and also development of sculpture. It was an important center of sculpture along with the center of Gandhara and that is Gandhar and Amravati. There are some other structures or sculptural remains which are connected to these cults that we have, because these cults are not only about Shiva or Vishnu per se, but we have range of other deities, we have range of animals, we also have range of female deities which are associated with Vishnu and Shiva. So we have the worship of Shivalinga, and we find an evidence of Shivalinga from 2nd century AD, which is found from Bhuteshwar in the area of Mathura. Then as far as Vaishnavism is concerned, the association of Shri Lakshmi and then Gaj Lakshmi is very important here. Then besides this, we have iconic representations on numismatic. These numismatic evidences pertaining to Kushanas, for example, Vema Cadphises tells us about the representation of Shiva, bull and the trident. So we have range of not only deities but also the certain elements which are associated with these deities. From Mathura, we also find evidences pertaining to sculpture of Durga Mahishasur which is found from Mathura. Now, as far as the triad of Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva is concerned, or the resurgence of Brahmanism is concerned, or how Puranas were a newer form of worship is concerned, we have already referred to these aspects a little. As far as the newer form of worship is concerned, and that we find from post-Mauryan centuries to Gupta period and onwards, we find that this newer form of worship was based on vratas, that is vratas, various kind of vows, and we also have tirtha, which is pilgrimage. So entire newer range of worship, and here you have worship of idols becomes very, very important, and you have also emergence of temples. Now temples were an important complex where the the entire ethos of Brahmanism could be disseminated through various dance drama, various stories, and enactment of various rituals. The concept of avatara is very interesting here, because this is the concept that we find from in the Puranic Hinduism, and this concept is basically based on the various manifestations of a particular deity or a particular cult. For example, whether it is Vishnu or Shiva, there are various forms of Vishnu and Shiva which are supposed to be various manifestations, various moods, various activities of these deities, and so we find that these actually develop in the formative phase, which is post-Mauryan centuries, and go on to develop in the Gupta period. Now it's interesting here that Buddha came to be included as Avatara or Vishnu, and this we find in Vayu Puran and the later Puranas. Also, the cultural setting and the cultural milieu should not be ignored, because in Buddhism also we find that the theory of the concept of reincarnation was very much in play. Then there were various deities which were part of the cult, and there was a definite hierarchy between these various deities, and some of them could be in the position of prominence, some could be subsidiary, and one could have kind of a pyramidal structure, especially if you look into the post Gupta centuries. Also, the process of assimilation had its own limitations, because it could not go uncontested. Many times it could not be smooth, and there could be definite purposes of assimilation. As far as Shaivism is concerned, Upanishads tell us about Rudra Shiva, and Rudra Shiva is basically a blend of Rudra and Shiva. Rudra, the Vedic counterpart of Shiva, and in the Upanishads we find that Rudra appears as a wrath giver, and in Tatrayini Samhita we find both the aspects of this cult, that is both the malevolent and also the beneficent, and it is the beneficent which is the Shiva of this cult, and it is in the Swet Asvatara Upanishad that we find this development of emergence of devotional cult, and we find that it is in this Upanishad particularly that both the deities Rudra and Shiva basically merge. And why Rudra could actually fuse easily into Shiva was because it did contain both the elements of good and noble and the evil. Shaivism, in its fuller elaboration, also assimilated the aboriginal deities, the family gods, the mountain god called Ayanar, and the phallus worship, that is the Linga worship. And in fact, the antiquity of this practice is debated. Shaivism also took roots in a wider geography, and it was made popular because it sought to assimilate and accommodate the various sects and various practices. One may add here that Pashupata sect was the earliest sect which was concerned with Shaivism. Now, as far as the assimilation is concerned, this assimilation one could find of various animals can be seen here. For example, we have the skin of animals like antelope or tiger, etc., which was being used by these deities. Then also serpent comes as a is basically used as a garland, and we have the Tamil counterpart of Ganesha, which is Tamil Pilayar, which was also the elephant-headed god. In the Sangam literature, we find reference to Shiva. We have reference coming from Akanuru, and also Akanuru where we have reference to three-headed god called Shiva, or we have reference to Kurram, which was a god of deity of destruction. Then Tamil deity Murugan is also appropriated as part of Skanda Kartikeya family. As far as Shiva was concerned, Shiva basically represented fertility and asceticism, and we find that at a later point in time, the river Ganga is also associated with Shaivism, and this period actually was marked by increased incidences of sculpture, and these sculptures could be found from various locations in central India. Now coming to Vaishnavism, one has to look at Vaishnavism in somewhat greater detail. We find that Vishnu emerges as a very important deity, a solar deity in part of solar group of deities in Rig Veda, and we have various references also. We have certain hymns also dedicated. However, it is only from Mahabharata that Vaishnavism actually becomes visible. Vedic Vishnu was merged with Bhagavata, and we find that it happens in early Christian centuries, and there were several cults which were actually associated to produce the cult of Vishnu, or this Vaishnavism. So we have of these cults, one may refer to Vasudevism, which was in vogue during the period of Panini who composed Ashtadhyayi, and Vasudev could be a deity of Vrishni clan, and it was then merged with the cult of Narayan. We also find that there was the cult of Arjuna, which was blended into the cult of Vishnu. Then the cult of Sankarshna Balram is also very important, and he was basically the elder brother of Krishna. And the Krishna cult of Yadava is also a very important cult. Now, when we talk about the development of Vaishnavism, one has to also take into cognizance, these various, clans. For example, the Vishnu clan and the Yadavas, since they were related to each other, it could help, in bringing about the Vishnu and Yadavas, and also assimilation of Krishnaism into the cult of Vishnu. Krishnaism itself, did assimilate several other cults. Then we have Nar Narayana cult. We also have the Gopala Krishna of Abhira cult. So, as far as the cult of Vishnu is concerned, the cult of Vishnu evolved and developed with the assimilation and accommodation of various cults. And here there are various questions that one may raise. For example, the concept of ahimsa. Whether it was in some contradiction with the practice of sacrifices, etc., etc. Also, the cult of Vishnu was consolidated, and Bhagavatas were their important adherents. Guptas themselves called as Param Bhagavatas, and there were many other rulers who called them as Bhagavatas. So they were basically, the followers or the adherent of this cult. In Mahabharata, we find that Vasudev Krishna is none other than Narayan Vishnu. So in Mahabharata, there is fusion of these two different cults. Narayana is actually associated with or merged with Vasudev Krishna here. We also find that it's somewhat very interesting that Varna system is upheld. Its sanctity is upheld on the one hand, and on the other hand, Shudras are given certain concessions, and they were somewhat liberal to Shudras, so that and it was permitted that they could worship these cults. As far as Bhagavad Gita is concerned, Bhagavad Gita is supposed to be part of Mahabharata only. However, it was written at a later date than the war itself, and it was not before early Christian centuries that Bhagavad Gita could be written. So it could be around say 200 BC or so. Also, Bhagavad Gita is a text which deals with various things. On one hand, it's a text which deals with philosophy of life, of duty, etc. On the other hand, it's about devotion to a particular deity, about self-surrender to a particular deity, and the liberation could only be possible if you could surrender yourself to a particular deity. Also, it talks about Varnashram Dharma. Then there are many other questions, unresolved questions about the identity of caste, etc., which could be seen in Bhagavad Gita. As we have already suggested that Mathura was an important center in the early Christian centuries, and we find that Sri Lakshmi and Gaj Lakshmi came to be associated with Vaishnavism, and they are their presence in that area, the presence of their worship in that area is also attested sculpturally. Then the Avatara of Vishnu, we know about the 10 avatars of Vishnu, but it is the only 4 which are generally found, and these avatars are basically Vishnu in the Manush form, Vishnu as the dwarf, Vishnu in the Varaha, that is boar, as a boar, and Vishnu as man lion, which is Narasimha. This brings us to the last important aspect of our lecture, which is Shaktaism. It has been speculated that the presence of fertility and maternity complex and the representations in terracotta and seal in the pre-Vedic period actually related to Devi. There is no doubt that we have number of terracotta figurines. In fact, in one of the other lectures on women in early India, we have already touched upon this aspect that the concept of mother goddess may not withstand the testimony and a careful scrutiny actually. And one may talk about Alexandra Jansen's work actually here, which deals with terracotta figurines and the cult of mother goddess. How valid is this cult of mother goddess actually? In the Vedic period, we find reference to a number of deities actually. There are so many names that we have. We have reference to Durga, and we have reference to Bhadrakali, we have reference to Narayani, we have reference to Kaushiki, we have reference to Usha, then we have reference to Ila, Saraswati, Aditi. There's so on and so forth. You have so many names actually. However, what is important here is that they appear basically as forces of nature, and one does not see them in their anthropomorphic form. So there's no personification of these deities, and in a way the agency is not given to these deities, that they are not shown in the human form. Also, Devi's sculptural representation as Mahishasur Mardini have been found at Mathura and the adjacent Sonk, which are dated to early Christian centuries. We find that there are some important elements of Devi which were very, very important. Now, what are these elements? These elements actually deal with the fighting spirit of the Devi, that she is fierce, and she is a fighter, she is a warrior, she also kills the demons, and she lives in forest, and so on and so forth. She lives in Vindhyas, and so on and so forth. So basically we have a certain characterization of Devi which is very, very important, and we find that from Vedic period onwards, Devi actually appears, or these Shakti actually appears as a consort, and it is from the formative phase, which is the early Christian centuries, that the concept of Devi actually starts crystallizing, and we find this in Devi Mahatmya, which deals with the eulogistic account of Devi, or in the praise of Devi, or there's certain value which is associated with this cult of Devi, which becomes important. And what is important here is that Brahmins played a very, very important role in integrating the various cults pertaining to Devi, and they are all infused into one, which is which comes out in the form of Devi Mahatmya. Now, to conclude, one may say that the Puranic Hinduism or Hinduism, these evolve historically, and one has to understand that there is certain trajectory, and one should not try to equate Hinduism which develops, or Puranic Hinduism which develops from say early Christian centuries to the period of Vedas. There no doubt there are certain one may trace the development from Vedic period onward. Doesn't mean that Puranic Hinduism can be dated back to an earlier period. Also, one needs to distinguish between what was Vedic Brahmanism and Puranic Hinduism. Their entire thrust, their mode of worship were very, very different. And also, Vedic Brahmanism is all about mastery over certain rituals, whereas Puranic Hinduism was about a practice of devotion and a newer form of worship where you have vows, pilgrimage, and new structures, new idols being worshipped. But what one really finds difficult here is how does one ascribe the assimilation of various cults into what is supposed to be Puranic Hinduism. Now because the archaeological evidences only come after a certain point in time, and that is not before postmodern centuries in a major way. So these are the questions that one need to address. Thank you.
Dear friends, on that note, we would like to thank Dr. Sahai for coming to our show and delivering this wonderful lecture. And thank you, dear friends, to listening to our lecture. We will meet again, and then thank you for watching. Thank you.